Party on. I'm a party animal. I'm a real super party animal.
Yeah, me too. But you're alright for this. Aren't you? Listen, Adam.
It's Coulter.
Coulter. I just need 5 minutes. Right, that's all. Then after, if you want, we can go back to my place. The top of the canyon. I've got wine. I can make us omelets. We party.
Hey, sir, I have a question. No, can I ask a question, please? No, this is just a real quick one. It's a simple thing. No, it's just a question about you, sir. How old do they happen to be? You're very good to be, sir. It's just to read that back here with
Nothing like a little bit of intensity to start the afternoon. That wonderful trailer for the novel The Harder They Come was done by Jameson Fry and Harry Boyle, and I think they did an amazing job. I personally cannot wait to see or read what happens. My name is Patsy Hicks, and I'm Director of Education, temporarily blinded by these lights that are going towards me. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's conversation and reading with T.C. Boyle and Charles Donelan. This is the final 2016 version of the series Parallel Stories. I don't know how many of you have come to the ones preceding this, but we've been very fortunate, as we are today, to have some stellar authors with us looking at art and the creative process through a multidisciplinary lens. You've already seen that today is a slightly different mix-up than what we might normally do, so just to let you know, there'll be about a 20-minute conversation between Charles and Tom here on stage, and then he will do a reading solo and go off into whatever other pyrotechnics that might be his want this afternoon, although he is nursing a cold, so you need to be kind to him. I'm going to give you just a brief background of both of them, although I'm sure you are very familiar with T.C. Boyle as the author of 26 books of fiction, including most recently When the Killing's Done, 2011, San Miguel, 2012. T.C. Boyle Stories, Volume 2 from 2013, and what we just saw, The Harder They Come from 2015, and The Terranauts, 2016. He received his PhD in 19th century British literature from the University of Iowa in 1977, his MFA from the University of Iowa Writers Workshop in 1974, and his BA in English and History from SUNY Potsdam in 1968. He's been a member of the English department at the University of Southern California since 1978, where he has served as a distinguished professor of English. His work has been translated into more than 24 foreign languages, and stories have appeared in most of the major American magazines, including a very recent November issue of The New Yorker. He's been the recipient of a number of literary awards, including the PEN Faulkner Prize for Best Novel of the Year, World's End, in 1988, the PEN Malamud Prize in the short story, T.C. Boyle Stories, 1999, and the Prix Médicis Étrangers for Best Foreign Novel in France, The Tortilla Curtain, 1997. We are delighted he lives here in Santa Barbara and that he has agreed once again to come here to discuss and read his work. Taking on the interlocutor's role this afternoon is Charles Donelan, also a Santa Barbara resident and favorite son, and a bit of a local literary hero. Charles has lived in Santa Barbara since 2001 and has worked at the Independent since 2004. As the classical arts editor, he writes about music, theater, visual art, literature, dance, and even the occasional film. His background as a teacher and scholar includes degrees from Yale, where he got a BA in English. So do you remember how Garrison Keillor always made jokes about English majors? Today is proof that it works. I'm one too, if the truth be known. Teaching a PhD in comparative literature. He has done teaching stints at the Collegiate School in New York City, Tufts University, Bard College, Columbia University, UCSB, and most recently for the past 11 years at the Laguna Blanca School. We're so pleased to welcome them both to this series, Parallel Stories. The umbrella theme this fall has been longing and disappointment, a theme which became more poignant in recent days in terms of all the things that are going on globally. And it was very richly explored by Andrew Weiner and Jeff Dyer last month. Today's pairing was inspired by an interview with Creative Process in which T.C. Boyle remarked, "I've experienced disillusionment with the limits of human life and understanding, perhaps because I live so intensely in the imagination. This has hit me harder than most, I really can't say. But the mythos that underpins all societies is transparent, and that transparency, once seen through, is crushingly disappointing." Of course, he's not a man to be easily limited, even by his own words. I suspect that he and Charles will touch on this and 1,000 other strands this afternoon. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Good afternoon. Welcome home.
Hi, Charles. Thanks. I'm sitting on a microphone speaker. How about you?
I think I have a microphone as well. Are we hearing me?
Yes.
Excellent. I understand that you've been around the country talking about this book now for quite a few weeks, and I hope that it feels good to be back.
Yes, it does. But of course, like many of you here today, I had to get to these cities and back in this howling steel death trap they call an airplane, which is also a petri dish for diseases. So I'm barely alive today, folks.
Well, that's very appropriate for what I'm going to ask you about first, because one of the things that this book, and particularly the title of this book, put me in mind of was the expression Spaceship Earth. Now, we've been living with that expression for several decades now, and I think it was originally coined to call attention to the fact that the Earth is not an infinite bowl of natural resources to which we can continually return and use forever, and that in fact it's some kind of a craft that we're traveling on. But when you talk about Terranauts, you're not talking about the way that we're all Terranauts on this spaceship Earth. You're talking about something much more specific. Maybe you could just explain for the group the term and what it refers to in your book.
Well, I haven't invented the term for this novel.
Right.
This novel is based on the Biosphere 2 experiment, 91 through 93 in the Arizona desert, in which a 3.15 acre enclosure was built. 4 men, 4 women were sealed inside for 2 years with 3,800 species of plants and animals to see if we could create another biosphere, a man-generated biosphere, in the event that the one we live in should turn to marriage, if you'll forgive the expression, or have a space colony if this one should turn to marriage, which it seemed to be well on its way to doing. Anyway, this was meant to be the first of 50 consecutive closures with a new crew every 2 years going in. In the real history that I'm writing about, it only lasted 6 months into the second closure because the friendly billionaire who put up the money had a little tiff with the not-so-friendly creator who came up with the idea. So there was only the one closure and half of a second. So it's so wonderful for me to take all the real history, use all of what really happened, and just posit a second crew, because again, there are going to be 49 more.
And it's, I think, quite fascinating to follow these Terranauts, the 8 Terranauts who, in your novel, go inside the material closure of what you refer to as E2, and they wear these beautiful bright red spacesuits, but boy, it's not long before they're dirty, they're uncomfortable, and they're hungry. It's more of a subsistence farm in there than it is a spacecraft.
If only Jenny Craig had known about it. The men lost 18% of their body weight, the women 10%. They were subsisting on 1,500 calories a day, and of course working frantically all the time to grow that 1,500 calories.
And I think it's quite a fascinating spectacle in your book, this image of these people who are high-performing Americans with advanced degrees, and they're malnourished. And not only that, at a certain point, they begin to suffocate or experience hypoxia, a kind of lack of oxygen. Maybe you can talk about that one.
Yeah, so when this first happened, and I'm sure many of you will remember it, it was a huge deal, second only to NASA, and they were aping NASA, actually. These biospherians, as they were called, were on the front cover of all the magazines, and newspapers covered them. Tourists went to peer through the glass walls of them. This was a big deal. But 12 days into the first closure, the real history that I'm talking about here, one of the biospherians, or Terranauts as I call them, cut off the tip of her finger in the rice hulling machine. Now, one of the 8 is a doctor, for obvious reasons. He sewed it back in place and treated it and so on. But it wasn't looking real good. Then she held her hand up to the visitor's window, and the best hand man in Pima County looked at it and said, "You've got to go to the hospital, you're going to lose that." So she went out and broke closure 12 days in. And she was only out for 5 hours. They counted approximately how many breaths she took of our atmosphere, etc. And then she went back in. But to my mind, and I think to the minds of many of the people in the public, this kind of blew it, because the excitement and the hook of this is they can't leave, no matter what. So I can take that history, and in my second closure, the 8 Terranauts are very aware of this, and Ramsey, one of them, says quite pointedly, "Well, we don't care. Somebody could die. We're not going to open that. It's as if we are on Mars." So that gives me a little dramatic tension right from the beginning.
I think one of the most fun things about this book is the multiple narrative perspectives. You have 3 characters who each tell this story from their own point of view. 2 of them are inside, but one of them is on the outside, and she's looking in, and she's very envious. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the character who doesn't make the cut. Is that something you can relate to?
Yeah, well, I think we all can, when you want something quite desperately and you're competing with others. So the deal was there were 16, just as with the astronauts, and 8 would be selected. So there are 3 first-person narrators. You meet them in succession throughout the book. They talk to you in first person, and it's very intimate because they're talking right to you and making their own case for themselves. So the first is Dawn Chapman, who is admitted. The second is Ramsey Ruththorpe. He's kind of kind of a Lothario, kind of a wheeler-dealer kind of guy. He's the communications director. He makes it. The third narrator is Linda Ryu, who does not make it and is quite bitter about it. Having her be excluded allows me to talk about this kind of competition within a cult. Of course, this was a kind of cult. It also allows me to have something happening outside this hermetic microcosm of what's going on inside. So it was a kind of happy accident to discover that I would do it in this way.
Maybe you could talk a little bit more about another aspect of the book that I thought was humorous and ironic, the way that the Terranauts name the group that are running the mission control crew, and their nicknames. Those are the nicknames that Terranauts give them. But maybe you might want to run through some of those.
It's a no-brainer that this is a new world created, and I'm a novelist creating a world within a world, within a world, within a world. So to use some of the religious mythology of our culture was a no-brainer. So they call the creator God the creator, and they call him GC for short. And of course, then you have the financier, and they call him GF, God the financier, for short, and so on. And all the major figures outside have religious names connected to them because we are playing, after all, with creating our own Garden of Eden.
And that brings me to a question that I think everyone here can relate to. I've been in Santa Barbara for 15 years now, and I still haven't quite got used to the kind of cavalier way people throw around another day in paradise within the dream, because I feel like, don't you know any of the literature of paradise? It is an inherently unstable condition. There's no paradise stories that end well in my experience.
So are you saying that we're all deluded and we'll all be dead? Well, that's obvious.
It's only
why remind everybody? This is why they invented alcohol and drugs, by the way.
But maybe you could talk a little bit more about the notion that this is a way of exploring an alternative, given the fragility of the ecosystem that we all live in. E1.
Yeah, well, again, as you well know, Charles, I don't have a program or an outline or anything else. I just find material and let it develop on its own. And I don't know what kickstarted this. I originally wanted to write about it in its period, but I kind of lost interest, as I said, and forgot about it. I think it was the fact that NASA is pursuing this now. NASA, as many of you will be aware, had a one-year closure that ended this past August in the Mauna Loa crater, and they had 6 men and women for a year inside. It wasn't absolute closure. They were allowed to go outside if they wore spacesuits because they were going to simulate a kind of space colony. There's a tremendous chutzpah in all this, you know. Around the time of that closure, so a year ago, August, Elizabeth Colbert, the wonderful environmental writer who often writes in the New Yorker, wrote about this and pointed out how difficult it is to create a self-replicating ecosystem. Evolution has had billions of years to do it here, but these people who invented the biosphere, these panels of scientists, they felt that they were going to create a kind of mix and match universe of their own. So she pointed out that it's almost impossible to go to Mars and to build such a self-replicating biosphere. So maybe we should take a little longer look at the one we're living in now and try to preserve that a bit.
One of the things that I found most satisfying about this book was that, and maybe this has, obviously it has something to do with your way of approaching your work, but also I think with the subject, is that it was unpredictable. I was worried when those bush babies first got into a little spat. I thought, uh-oh, we're headed towards Lord of the Flies under glass here. They're tearing each other apart. But that's not what happens. I promise that we will not engage in any significant spoilers, but maybe you could talk a little bit about mission control does not control everything in this story, but it's not the human propensity to violence necessarily that gets these particular Terranauts into hot water with their bosses.
I think you're referring to sex, my dear friend. I didn't realize how sexy this would be. just following it. But 4 men, 4 women under glass for 2 years, what are they going to do? In my telling, as opposed to the actual history, mission control is even more controlling and not allowing them to have hardly any contact with the outside world except to do interviews on the internet for school children and so on. I preferred it that way because of the whole God metaphor, of course, but a kind of big brother is watching you, you know. Every move these people made was being observed. Tourists would pay money to come and look through the glass walls, and here they are, covered in pig excrement and, you know, and shoveling and dirty all the time, just trying to survive. And, you know, right there is somebody face pressed to the glass taking photographs. All of that is a kind of zoo atmosphere, you know. It kind of turned me on and made this not only comedic for me, but also, you know, under the surface, something that we all need to come to grips with. What, as you have mentioned earlier, what are the limits of our existence on this planet, and what are we doing to it?
Again, to emphasize the sheer imagination of this particular version of this particular situation. It's not a dystopian novel. This doesn't, in my opinion, take us to a place that's horrible or untenable necessarily. It's ironic. There's discomfort galore, and there's certainly plenty of conflict. But I guess the conclusion, one of the conclusions that I draw is that humans are capable of mating in captivity. That's good to know. They need to do that.
Before too long, yeah.
Maybe you could talk a little bit more about the concept of material closure, which I think is a radical form of sustainability, which is, and locavorism. Both concepts are very current right now in the culture 2016, 2017.
Absolutely, but don't forget, this closure, it cost $150 million in 1990 to build this place, and $10 million a year to keep it running. For 8 people to be sustained. What about the rest of us? What are we going to do? So there's an element too that I'm playing with here.
In E2, that's your biosphere environment, the impact of environmental changes are immediate and dramatic. The rare sight of these highly educated Americans who are chronically undernourished is kind of the first striking way in which that comes out. But then at a certain point, that is transformed by, I guess, it's the fact that there's a little less sunlight than there is at another season of the year, and suddenly these people are in serious oxygen debt. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the way in which this environment that you have partly reported on and partly imagined reflects the larger ecological issues that we all face.
Well, if the experiment had any validity, and it wasn't a scientific experiment, it wasn't a theory and we're going to prove it or disprove it, it was like, well, hey kids, let's build this thing and get inside and see what happens. If there's any validity, it does show just what you're talking about, how fragile this Earth is and how we process our water and our bodily fluids and so on. It happens in a matter of days. Any scented products are strictly banned for obvious reasons. So, you know, if you wore perfume or you had toothpaste that had flavor or whatever, that's immediately into the atmosphere and into the water and everything else. So it is like an accelerator of what's happening in the larger world.
Did you go to the original?
Oh, yes.
And how was that? What was that like, the tour? Did you go inside?
Yes. So, in its time, and I met some people who had been there in its time, when you're peering through the window, and there they are, the Biospherians. I went just a couple of years ago when I was doing research for this. Anyway, you can go. It's northeast of Tucson. It's an astonishing looking structure. It does look like a space station set down there in the desert. It's quite beautiful, actually. Now it is owned by the University of Arizona, and they conduct small experiments inside, but it would never be closure again. The closure was so fascinating because, again, if it's an emergency and you must be in there, well, then you can't break closure, as this woman did early on. Further, this is also true. People would always try to tempt them, so they're starving in the second year, and really somebody did one night sneak up and put the extra large pepperoni pizza right outside the oven to see if they could resist it, you know.
Quite an ethical question raised there about pizza. There are ethical questions galore raised by the relationship between the Terranauts and their controllers, the people that have created the experiment, and they culminate in a conflict which I think is properly described as over a woman's right to choose. Was that intentional, or how does that fit into larger everyday political issues having to do with the woman and her right to make decisions about her own body?
In a democracy, nonetheless. But this wasn't a democracy. This was
not,
a cult in which GC controlled everything. And of course, the sticky early scenes, there's 4 sections. The first is pre-closure, then closure year 1, closure year 2, and then re-entry. And when they're all fighting to get in, each of them has to go in to be examined minutely in every detail. And there is the issue of birth control. 2 of the women choose not to take it because it's not natural. It's an experiment in being natural, much to the chagrin of mission control, which wants to control everything.
And I don't think it's giving away too much to say that mission control doesn't start out very enthusiastic about procreation under glass. That's not their initial position on that. One common way that cultures use storytelling is to explore the stakes and consequences of childbearing in a particular time and place. You get Jane Austen, she's asking if a young woman can find a man with him to start a family. Nathaniel Hawthorne is wondering if the Massachusetts colony can produce spiritual leadership that's willing to own its illegitimate children. Your book is about tension between scientific, rational approaches to survival as a species and the biological accidents that occur when real people are in a real place, even if it's under glass. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about nature and science.
Nature will have its way. And of course, I've written about this many times over and over. I'm fascinated by what we're doing on this planet as an animal species. So, for instance, in the Inner Circle from 12 years ago about Dr. Kinsey, the guy who invented sex, he said, you know, the poets have had 2,500 years to tell you about love. I will now tell you about reproduction in the human animal. So there's some element of that here as well. They're not supposed to be procreating in there, but if the ants are, and the other 3,800 species are, doesn't it seem like that is the most natural thing that could possibly be? And you know, we don't want to give anything away. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but certainly.
Well, I think another issue that it brings up, which is a fascinating one for us, especially in this society of the spectacle that we live in, where you know, people are often experiencing life either as you know, passive spectators or as spectacles themselves. That material closure works in 2 directions, because the Terranauts can't come out, but the mission control people can't go in and out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that turns out to be a significant leverage for the Terranauts, that they have their own territory.
Yeah, absolutely. Once they're in there, there is no way to get them out without causing a tremendous scandal. So yeah, eventually they do, or some of them do pursue their own ends, which may be antithetical to the ends of mission control. Which brings us to the point at which,
Yes,
I should begin reading a story soon.
I think so.
You know, the story is only going to take 3 hours. We should get going with it, and we can
Terrific.
take a Q&A at the end. Both of us will come back up and do a Q&A. Okay.
Thank you so much.
So, and many of you know me well, you know that the thing I love to do best is to dramatize a story and present it to you aloud in a darkened auditorium. It brings me back to my mother, who taught me how to read, and her voice, and my 8th grade English teacher, Donald Grant, who would read us stories on Fridays if we behaved ourselves. He was an amateur actor, and he read the old chestnuts like To Build a Fire, The Most Dangerous Game, and dramatized them, and it just thrilled us. So I want to thrill you too, and make you laugh. So instead of reading from the novel, it's great. My mother loved it. I loved it. You know, you've heard all about it. Have fun with it. I'm going to read you the news story that was in the New Yorker last month. And this is about my latest obsession. It's called CRISPR-Cas9 technology. So for the past 2 years in Science, Nature, they've had big ads, and you'll find out about that in the story. It shows a fist in a boxing glove slamming something, and it says, "Knock out any gene." They are selling home kits for all of us to use Cas9 gene editing technology in order to create new species of bacteria and molds, which they give you in a little kit. And it's only $5,000. You can make your own species. Now, I wonder, is this a good idea? So, the story is called Are We Not Men? The dog was the color of a maraschino cherry, and what it had in its jaws, I couldn't quite make out at first, not until it parked itself under the hydrangeas and began throttling the thing. This little episode would have played itself out without my even noticing, except that I rolled to the stove to put the kettle on for a cup of tea and happened to glance out the window at the front lawn. The lawn, a deep, lush blue-green that managed to hint at both the turquoise of the sea and the viridian of a Kentucky meadow, was something I took special pride in, and any wandering dog, no matter its chromatics, was an irritation to me. The seed had been pricey, a blend of chewings, fescue, bahia, and zoysia, incorporating a gene from a species of algae that allowed it to glow under the porch light at night. And while it was both disease and drought resistant, it didn't take well to foot traffic, especially four-footed traffic. I stepped out on the porch and clapped my hands, thinking to shoo the dog away, but it didn't move. Well, actually it did, but only to flex its shoulders and tighten its jaws around its prey, which I now saw was my neighbor Allison's pet micro-pig. The pig itself, doe-eyed and no bigger than a Pekingese, didn't seem to be struggling, or not any longer. And even as I came down off the porch looking to grab the first thing I could find to brandish at the dog, I felt my heart thundering. Allison was one of those pet owners who tend to anthropomorphize their animals. And that pig was the center of her unmarried and unboyfriended life. She would be shattered, absolutely. And who was going to break the news to her? I felt a surge of anger. How had this stupid thing got out of the house anyway? And for that matter, whose dog was this? I didn't own a garden rake, and there were no sticks on the lawn. The street trees were an edited variety that didn't drop anything, not twigs, seeds, or leaves. So I stormed across the grass empty-handed, shouting the first thing that came to mind, which was, "Bad! Bad dog!" I wasn't thinking. And the effect wasn't what I would have hoped for, even if I had been. The dog dropped the pig all right, which was clearly beyond revivification at this point, but in the same motion, it lurched up and clamped its jaws on my left forearm, growling continuously as if my forearm were a stick it had fetched in a friendly game between us. Curiously, there was no pain, and no blood either. Just a firm, insistent pressure, the saliva hot and wet on my skin as I pulled in one direction, and the dog, all the while regarding me out of a pair of dull, uniform eyes, pulled in the other. "Let go," I demanded. But the dog didn't let go. "Bad dog," I repeated. I tugged. The dog tugged back. There was no one on the street, no one in the next yard over, no one in the house behind me to come to my aid. I was dressed in the t-shirt, shorts, and slippers I pulled on about 10 minutes earlier when I got out of bed, and here I was, caught up in this maddening interspecies pas de deux at 8 in the morning of an otherwise ordinary day, already exhausted. The dog, this cherry-red, hairless freak with the armored skull and bulging musculature of a pit bull, showed no sign of giving in. It had got my arm, and it meant to keep it. After a minute of this, I went down on one knee to ease the tension in my back, a gesture that only seemed to excite the animal all the more, its nails tearing up divots as it fought for purchase, trying, it occurred to me now, to bring me down to its level. Before I knew what I was doing, I balled up my free hand and punched the thing in the head 3 times in quick succession. The effect was instantaneous. The dog dropped my arm and let out a yelp, backing off to hover at the edge of the lawn and eye me warily, as if now, all at once, the rules of the game had changed. In the next moment, just as I realized that I was, in fact, bleeding, a voice cried out behind me, "Hey, I saw that!" A girl was striding across the lawn toward me, a preternaturally tall girl I at first took to be a teenager, but was actually a child of 11 or 12. As soon as she appeared, the dog fell in step with her and everything became clear. She marched directly up to me, glaring, and said, "You hit my dog!" I was in that mood. "I'm bleeding," I said, holding out my arm in evidence. "You see this? Your dog bit me. You ought to keep him chained up." "That's not true. Ruby would never bite anybody. She was just playing is all." I wasn't about to debate her. This was my property, my arm, and that lump of flesh lying there bleeding into the grass was Allison's dead pet. I pointed to it. "Oh," she said, her voice dropping. "I'm so sorry. I didn't... Is it yours?" "It's my neighbor's." I gestured to the house just visible over the hedge. "She's going to be devastated. This pig..." I wanted to call it by name, personalize it, but couldn't for the life of me summon its name. "Is all she has. And it wasn't cheap either." I glanced at the dog, its pinkish gaze and incarnadine flanks, as I'm sure you can appreciate. The girl, who stood 3 or 4 inches taller than me, and whose own eyes were an almost iridescent shade of violet that didn't exist in nature, or at least hadn't until recently, gave me an unflinching look. Maybe she doesn't have to know. "What do you mean she doesn't have to know? The thing's dead. Look at it." "Maybe it was run over by a car." "Do you want me to lie to her?" The girl shrugged. The dog, panting, settled down on its haunches. "I already said I'm sorry. Ruby got out the front gate when my mother went to work, and I came right after her. You saw me." "What about this?" I demanded, holding up my arm, which wasn't so much punctured as abraded, since most of the new breeds had had their canines and carnassials genetically modified to prevent any real damage in a situation like this. "It has its shots, right?" "She's a cherry pet," the girl said, giving me a look of disgust. "Germline immunity comes with the package. I mean, everybody knows that." It was a Tuesday, and I was working from home as I did every Tuesday and Thursday. I worked in IT like practically everybody else on the planet, and I found I actually got more done at home than when I went into the office. My coworkers were a trial with their moods, opinions, facial tics, and all the rest. Not that I didn't like them. It was just that they always seemed to manage to get in the way at crunch time. Or maybe I didn't like them. Maybe that was it. At any rate, after the little contretemps with a girl and her dog, I went back in the house, smeared an antibiotic ointment on my forearm, took my tea and a handful of protein wafers to my desk, and sat down at the computer. If I gave the dead pig a thought, it was only in relation to Allison, who'd want to see the corpse, I suppose, which brought up the question of what to do with it. Let it lie where it was, or stuff it in a trash bag and refrigerate it till she got home from the office. I thought of calling my wife. Connie was regional manager of Bank USA, by necessity a master of interpersonal relations, and she would know what to do. But then it was hardly worth bothering her at work over something so trivial. I could have buried the corpse, I suppose, or tossed it in the trash and played dumb, but in the end, I wound up doing nothing. It was past 3 by the time I thought to take a lunch break, and because it was such a fine day, I brought my sandwich and a glass of iced tea out onto the front porch. By this juncture, I forgot all about the pig, the dog, and the grief that was brewing for Allison. But as soon as I stepped out the door, it all came back to me. The trees were alive with crow-parrots, variously screeching, cawing, and chattering amongst themselves, and they were there for a very specific reason. I don't know if you have crow-parrots in your neighborhood yet, incidentally, but believe me, they're coming. They were the inspiration of one of the molecular embryologists at the university here, who felt that inserting genes of the common crow into the invasive parrot population would put an end to the parrots' raids on our orchards and vineyards, giving them a taste for garbage and carrion instead of fruit on the vine, and having the added benefit of displacing the native crows, which had pretty well eliminated songbirds from our backyards. The only problem was the noise factor. Something in the mix seemed to have redoubled not only the volume, but the fury of the birds' calls, so that half the time you needed earplugs if you wanted to enjoy pretty much any outdoor activity. Which was the case now. The birds were everywhere, cursing fluidly. "Bad bird! Fuck, fuck, fuck!" flapping their spangled wings in one another's faces. Alarmed, I came down off the porch, and for the second time that day scrambled across the lawn to the flower bed where a scrum of birds had settled on the remains of Allison's pet. I flailed my arms, and they lifted off reluctantly into the sky, screeching, "Turd bird!" and the fractured call that awakened me practically every morning, "Cock sucker!" As for the pig, which I should have dragged into the garage. I realize that now. Its eyes were gone, and its faintly bluish hide was striped with bright red gashes. Truthfully, I didn't want to touch the thing. It was filthy. The birds were filthy. Who knew what zoonoses they were carrying? So I was just standing there in a quandary when Allison's car pulled into the driveway next door, scattering light. Allison was in her early 30s, with a top-heavy figure and a barely tamed kink of ginger hair she kept wrapped up in various scarves, which gave her an exotic look, as if she were displaced here in the suburbs. She was sad-faced and sweet, the victim of one catastrophic relationship after another. And I couldn't help feeling protective toward her. A single woman alone in that big house her mother had left her when she died. So when she came across the lawn, already tearing up, I felt I'd somehow let her down. And before I could think, I'd stripped off my shirt and draped it over the corpse. "Is that her?" she asked, looking down at the hastily covered bundle at my feet. "No," she said, "don't tell me." And then her eyes jumped to mine, and she was repeating my name, "Roy, Roy, Roy," as if ringing it in her throat. "Fuck you!" the crow parrots cried. In the next moment, she flung herself into my arms, clutching me to her so desperately I could barely breathe. "I don't want to see," she said in a small voice, each syllable a hot puff of breath on the bare skin of my chest. I could smell her hair, the shampoo she used, the taint of sweat over her arms. "The poor thing," she murmured, and she lifted her face so I could see the tears blurring her eyes. "I loved her, Roy. I really loved her." This called up a scene from the past, a dinner party at Allison's, Connie and me, another couple, and Allison and her last inamorata, a big-headed bore who worked for animal control, incinerating strays and transgenic misfits. Allison had kept the pig in her lap throughout the meal, feeding it from her plate, and afterward, while we sat around the living room cradling brandies and Benedictine, she propped the thing up at the piano where it picked out Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star with its modified hoops. "No," I said, agreeing with her. "You don't want to look. It was a dog, right? That's what..." And here she had a great awful moment to gather herself. "That's what Terry Wolfson said when she called me at work." I was going to offer up some platitude about how the animal hadn't suffered, though for all I knew the dog had gummed it relentlessly the way it had gummed my arm, when a voice called, "Hello!" from the street behind us, and we broke hastily apart. Coming up the walk was the tall girl, tottering on a pair of platform heels, and she had the dog with her, this time on a leash. I felt a stab of annoyance. Hadn't she caused enough trouble already? And embarrassment, that too. It wasn't like me to go shirtless in public, or to be caught in a full body embrace with my unmarried next-door neighbor either, for that matter. If she could read my face, the girl gave no indication of it. She came right up to us, the dog trotting along docilely at her side. Her violet gaze swept from me to the lump on the ground beneath the bloody T-shirt, and finally to Allison. "Je suis désolée, madame," she said. "Pardonnez-moi, mon chien ne savait pas ce qu'il faisait. Il est un bon chien, vraiment." This girl, this child, loomed over us, her features animated. She was wearing eyeliner, lipstick, and blush as if she were 10 years older and on her way to a nightclub. And her hair, blonde with a natural curl, spread like a tent over her shoulders and dangled all the way down to the small of her back. "What are you saying?" I demanded. "And why are you speaking French?" "Because I can. Puedo hablar en español también. Und ich kann auch in Deutsch sprechen. My IQ is 162, and I can run the 100 meters in 9.58 seconds. "Wonderful," I said, exchanging a look with Allison. "Terrific, really. Well, what are you doing here? What do you want?" "Your mother!" the birds cried. "I'm yours!" The girl shifted from one foot to the other, looking awkward like the child she was. "I just wanted to please beg you not to report Ruby to animal control. Because my father says they'll come and put her down. She's a good dog, she really is. And she never did anything like this before, and we never, ever let her run loose. It's just a freak occurrence," I said. "Right," she said. "An anomaly, an accident." Allison's jaw tightened. The dog looked tranquilly up at us out of its pink eyes as if all this was none of its concern. A bugless breeze rustled the trees along the street. "And what am I supposed to say?" Allison put in. "How am I supposed to feel? What do you want, forgiveness? Well, I'm sorry, but I just can't do it, not now." She gave the girl a fierce look. "You love your dog?" The girl nodded. "Well, I love Shoshana, too." She choked up. "More than anything in the world." We all took a minute to gaze down on the carcass. Then the girl lifted her eyes. "My father says we'll pay all damages. Here, she said, digging into her purse and producing a pair of business cards, one of which she handed to me and the other to Allison. Any medical treatment you may need, we'll take care of it, 100%. She assured me, eyeing my eye doubtfully before turning to Allison. And replace your pet too if you want, madame. It was a micro-dig, right, from Recombicor? It was a painful moment. I could feel for Allison, and the girl too. Though Connie and I didn't have any pets, not even one of the new hypoallergenic breeds, and we didn't have children either, though we discussed it often enough. There was a larger sadness at play here, a sadness of attachment and loss, and the way the world wreaks its changes, whether we're ready for them or not. We would have gotten through the moment, I think. Coming to some sort of understanding, Allison wasn't vindictive and I wasn't about to raise a fuss. But that same breeze swept across the lawn to flip back the edge of the t-shirt and expose the eyeless head of the pig, and that was all it took. Allison let out a gasp, and the dog, that crimson freak, jerked the leash out of the girl's hand and went right for it. When Connie came home, I was in the kitchen mixing a drink. The front door slammed. Connie was always in a hurry, no wasted motion, and though I'd asked her 100 times not to slam the door, she was constitutionally incapable of taking the extra 2 seconds to ease it shut. An instant later, her briefcase slapped down on the hallway table with the force of a thunderclap. Her heels drilled the parquet floor, tap, 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 and there she was in the kitchen saying, "Make me one too, would you, honey? Or no, wine. Do we have any wine?" I didn't ask her how her day had gone. All her days were the same, pedal to the metal, one situation after another, all of which she dealt with like a 5-star general driving the enemy into the sea. I didn't give her a hug or blow her a kiss either. We weren't that sort of couple. To her mind, and mine too, to be honest, it would have just been one more wasted motion. Wordlessly, I turned to the cabinet, took a glass down from the cupboard, poured her a glass of the Sancerre she liked, and handed it to her. Though I had the window open to catch the breeze, there was no sound of the birds, which must have flown off to haunt somebody else's yard. Allison's pet pig was killed today, I said, right out on our front lawn. By one of those transgenic pit bulls, one of the crimson ones they're always pushing on TV. Her eyebrows lifted. She swirled the wine in her glass, took a sip. And I got bit, I added, holding up my arm where a deep purplish bruise had wrapped itself around the skin just below the elbow. What she said next didn't follow, but then we often talked in non sequitur, she conducting a certain kind of call and response conversation in her head and I in mine. The responses never quite matching up. She didn't comment on my injury or the dog or Allison or the turmoil I'd gone through. She just set her glass down on the counter, patted her lips where the wine had moistened them, and said, "I want a baby." I suppose I should back up here a moment to give you an idea of where this was coming from. We've been married 12 years now, and we'd agreed that at some point we'd like to start a family, but we kept putting it off for one reason or another: our careers, finances, fear of the way a child would impact our lifestyle, the usual sort of thing. But with a twist. What sort of child? That was the question. Previous generations had only to fret over whether the expected mother would bear a boy or girl, or if the child would inherit Aunt Bethany's nose or Uncle Yuri's unibrow. But that wasn't the case anymore, not since CRISPR gene editing technology hit the ground running 20 years back. Now, not only could you choose the sex of the child at conception, you could choose its other features too, as if having a child were like going to the car dealership and picking the options to add onto the basic model. The sole function of sex these days had become recreational. Babies were conceived in the laboratory. That was the way it was, and that was the way it would be, until, as a species, we evolved into something else. The result was a nation, a world of children like the tall girl with the bright red dog. To my way of thinking, this was intrusive and unnatural, but to Connie's it was a no-brainer. "Are you out of your mind?" she'd say. "Do you really want your kid, our kid, to be the bonehead of the class? Or what, take career training, cosmetology, auto mechanics, for Christ's sake?" Now, tipping back her glass and downing the wine in a single belligerent gulp, she announced, "I'm 38 years old and I'm putting my foot down. I've made an appointment at Gen Lab for 10 a.m. Thursday, and I'm sacrificing a day of work for it, too. Either you come with me," she was glaring at me now, "or I swear I'm going to go out and get a sperm donor." Nobody likes an ultimatum. Especially when you're talking about a major life-changing event, the kind of thing both people involved have to enter into in absolute harmony. It didn't go well. She thought she could bully me, as if I were one of her underlings at work. I thought she couldn't. She thought she'd had the final word on the subject, I thought different. I said some things I wound up regretting later, snatched up my drink and slammed through the kitchen door and out into the backyard where for once no birds were cursing from the trees, and even the bees seemed muted as they went about their business. What came next was dependent on that silence, because otherwise I never would have heard the soft, heart-sick keening of Allison working through the stations of her grief. The sound was low and intermittent, a stunted release of air followed by a sodden gargling when the wheeze and rattle of the sprinklers starting up. And it took me a minute to realize what it was, and it was coming from the adjoining yard. In the instant, I forgot all about what had just transpired in my own kitchen, and thought of Allison, struck all over again by the intensity of her emotion. We managed to get the dog off the carcass, all three of us shouting at once while the girl grabbed for the leash, and I delivered 2 or 3 sharp kicks to the animal's hindquarters. But Allison's dead pig was none the better for it. The girl, red-faced and embarrassed despite her IQ and whatever other attributes she might have possessed, slouched across the lawn and down the street, the dog mincing beside her. And we both watched till she was gone, at which point I offered to do the only sensible thing and bury what was left of the remains. I dug a hole out back of Allison's potting shed. Allison read a passage I vaguely remembered from school. The stars are not wanted now, put out every one. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. I held her in my arms for the second time that day, then filled the hole and went home to make my drink and have Connie slam the front door and lay her demands on me. Now, as if I were being tugged on invisible wires, I moved toward the low hedge that separated our properties and stepped across it. The first thing I saw was Allison, hunched over the picnic table on her patio. She was still dressed in the taupe blouse and black skirt she'd worn to work, and she had her head down, her scarf bunched under one cheek. When I got closer, I saw that she was crying, and that got to me in a way I can't explain, so that before I knew what I was doing, I'd fallen down a long, dark tunnel and found myself consoling her in a way that seemed, how can I put this, so very natural at the time. It was dark when I got home. Connie was sitting on the couch in the living room watching TV with the sound muted. Hi, I said, feeling sheepish, feeling guilty. I'd never strayed before and didn't know why I'd done it now, except that I've been so furious with my wife and so strangely moved by Allison and her grief, as if that's an excuse, and I know it isn't. But trying, like all amateurs, to act as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Connie looked up. I couldn't read her face, but I thought, at least by the flickering light of the TV, that she looked softer, contrite even, as if she'd reconsidered her position, or at least the way she laid it on me. I'm sorry, I said, but I was upset, okay? I just went for a walk to clear my head. She had nothing to say to this. You eat yet? I asked, trying to change the subject. She shook her head. Me either, I said, feeling the weight lift as if ritual could get us through this. Do you want to go out? No, I don't want to go out, she said. I want a baby. And what did I say? From the shallow grave of my guilt that was no deeper than the layer of earth I'd flung over the shrunken and lacerated corpse of Allison's pet. I said, okay, we'll talk about it. Talk about it? The appointment is Thursday, 10 a.m. That's non-negotiable. She was right. It was time to start a family. And she was right, too, about cosmetology and auto mechanics. What responsible parent wouldn't want the best for his child, whether that meant a stable home, top-flight nutrition, and the best private school education money could buy, or tweaking the chromosomes in a test tube in a lab somewhere? Understanding, I was under duress. I didn't want to lose my wife. I loved her. I was used to her. She was the only woman I'd known these past 12 years and no more, a known quantity, my familiar. And there she was, poised on the edge of the couch, watching me, her will like some miasma seeping in under the door and through the cracks around the windows until the room was choked with it. It was like the moment in a wrestling match where the whistle blows and the grip gives way and nobody gets pinned to the mat. Okay, I said. Which is not to say I didn't give in without a fight. The next day, Wednesday, I had to go into the office and endure the usual banalities of my coworkers till I wanted to beat the walls of my cubicle in frustration. But on the way home, I stopped at a pet store and picked up an 8-week-old dog cat. By the way, if people still aren't sure what to call the young even now, 15 years after they were first created, they're not kittens and they're not puppies, but something in between, as the name of the new species implies. Kit pups, pup kits, The sign on the window read simply, "Baby dog cats on special." So I picked out a squirming little fur ball with a doggish face and tabby stripes and brought it home as a surprise for Connie, hoping it would distract her long enough to reevaluate the decision she was committing us to. I tucked the thing inside my shirt for the drive home, since from the minute the girl behind the counter had put it in its cardboard carrying container, it had begun alternately mewing and yipping in a tragic way. And it nestled there against my chest, warm and content, until I parked the car and going up the steps and into the house. Connie was already home, moving briskly about the kitchen. There were flowers on the table next to an ice bucket with the neck of a bottle of Veuve Clicquot protruding from it, and the room was redolent with the scent of my favorite meal, piquant basse style, topped with poached eggs, which I realized she must have made a special stop for at Maison Floor on her way home. This was a celebration, and no two ways about it. In the morning, we would procreate, or take our first steps in that direction, which on my part would involve producing a sperm sample under duress, unlike I couldn't help thinking, the way it had been with Allison. We didn't hug. We didn't kiss. I just said, "Hey," and she said, "Hey," back. "Smells great," I said, trying to gauge her expression as we both hovered over the table. "Perfect timing," she said, leaning in to adjust the napkin beside her plate that was already precisely aligned. I got there the minute they took it out of the oven. Claude himself brought it out to me, along with a loaf of that crusty sourdough you like, just baked this morning. I was grinning at her. "Great," I said. "Really great." Into the silence that followed, neither of us was ready yet to address the issue hanging over us. I said, "I've got a surprise for you." "Oh, sweet. What is it?" With a magician's flourish, I whipped the new pet from the folds of my shirt and held it out triumphantly for her. Unfortunately, I seemed to have startled the thing in the process, and it reacted by digging its claws into my wrist, letting out a string of rapid-fire barks and dropping a glistening turd on the tiles of the kitchen floor. "For you," I said. Her face fell. "You gotta be kidding me. You really think I'm that easy to buy off or what, distract?" She made no effort to take the thing from me. In fact, she clenched her hands behind her. "Take it back where you got it." The pup kit had softened now, retracting its claws and settling into the crook of my arm as if it recognized me. As if in the process of selecting it and secreting it in my shirt, I'd imparted something essential to it. Love, that is. And it was content to exist in a new world on a new basis altogether. "It's purring," I said. "What do you want me to say? Hallelujah? The thing's a freak. You're always saying so yourself every time one of those stupid commercials comes on." Suddenly, the jingle was playing in my head. A snatch of the last lulling measures of Pachelbel's canon, over which the announcer croons, "Dog person, cat person, it's all moot now." "No more a freak than that girl with the dog," I said. "What girl? What are you talking about? The one with the dog that bit me? She must have been 6'4". She has an IQ of 162, and still she let the dog out and still it bit me." "What are you saying? You're not trying to back out on me, are you? We had a deal, Roy, and you know how I feel about people that renege on a deal." Okay, calm down. All I'm saying is, maybe we want to have a kind of trial or something before we've never even had a pet. A pet is not a child, Roy. "No," I said, that's not what I meant. It was just, The crow parrots started up then with one of their raucous dinner time chants, squawking so piercingly you could hear them even with the windows shut. "Big Mac! Big Mac!" they crowed. "Fries!" And I lost my train of thought. "Are we going to eat?" Connie said in a fragile voice. And we both looked first to the microwave and then to the animal excreta on the kitchen floor. "Because I went out of my way," she said, tearing up. "Because I wanted this night to be special, okay?" So now we did hug, though the pup kit got between us, and, coward that I am, I told her everything was going to be all right. Later, after she'd gone to bed, I took the pup kit in my arms, went next door, and rang the bell. Allison answered in her nightgown, a smile creeping across her lips. "Here," I said, handing her the animal. "I got this for you." Fast forward 7.5 months. I am living in a house with a pregnant woman next door to a house in which there is another pregnant woman. Connie seems to find this amusing, never suspecting the truth of the matter. We'll glance up from the porch and see Allison emerging heavily from her car with an armload of groceries, and Connie will say things like, "I don't envy her," and "I hope she doesn't have to pee every 5 minutes the way I do," and She won't say who the father is. I just hope it's not that a-hole from animal control. What was his name? This is problematic on a number of levels. I play dumb, of course. What else can I do? Maybe she went to Gen Lab, I say. Her? You're kidding me, right? I mean, look at that string of jerks she keeps dating. If you don't know the truth, she's lower class, Roy. And I'm sorry to have to say it. I'm not about to argue the point. The fact is, I tried everything I could to talk Allison into going through with this. Finally, to my shame, falling back on the same argument about the whole Ubermensch, Untermensch dynamic Connie used on me. Trade school, cosmetology, self-denigration, back in the classroom, the works. But Allison merely gave me a bitter smile and said, I trust your genes, Roy. You don't have to be involved. I just want to do this, that's all, for myself. And for nature. You believe in nature, don't you? You don't have to be involved. But I was involved. Though we had sex only the one time, or two actually, counting the night I brought her the pup kit. And if she had a boy and he looked like me and grew up right next door playing with our daughter, how involved would that be? So there comes a day, sometime during the 8th month, a Tuesday when I'm working at home and Connie's at the office, and I'm so focused on the problem at hand I keep putting off my bathroom break until the morning's nearly gone. It's the way it always is when I'm deeply engaged with a problem. A kind of mind-body separation, but finally the body's needs prevail, and I push myself up from the desk to go down the hall to the bathroom. I'm standing there, in mid-flow, when I become aware of the sound of a dog barking on the front lawn, and I shift my torso ever so slightly so that I can glance out the window and see what the ruckus is all about. It's the red dog, the cherry pit that set all this in motion, and he's tearing around on my hybrid lawn, chasing something. My first reaction is anger. Anger at the tall girl and her fixer father and all the other idiots of the world. But by the time I get down the stairs and out the front door and into the sunlight, it dissipates, because I see that the dog isn't here to kill anything, but to play. And that what it's chasing is being chased willingly. Allison's dog cat, now a rangy adolescent and perhaps a third the size of the dog. For all my fretting over the lawn, I have to say that in that moment, with the light making a cathedral of the street trees and the neighborhood suspended in the grip of a lazy, warm afternoon, I found something wonderfully liberating in the play of these two animals, the dog cat especially. Allison named him Tiger in respect to his coloration, dark feral stripes against a kind of Pomeranian orange, and he lives up to his name, absolutely fearless and with an athleticism and elasticity that combines the best of both the species that went into making him. He runs rings around the pit bull, actually, feinting one way, dodging the next, racing up the trunk of a tree and out onto a branch before leaping to the next tree and springing back down, charged dog-like across the yard. Go, Tiger, I call out. Good boy, go get him. That's when I become aware of Allison, in a pair of maternity shorts and an enormous top, crossing from her front lawn to ours. She's put on a lot of weight, but not as much as Connie, because we opted for a big baby in the 11-pound range, wanting her to have that advantage right from the start. I haven't spoken with Allison much these past months, but I still have feelings for her, of course. Yeah, resentment, that is. So, I lift a hand and wave, and she comes back, and she waves back, and I watch her come barefooted through the glowing grass, while the sun sits in the trees and the animals frolic around her. I'm down off the porch now, and I can't help but smile at the sight of her. She comes up to me, moving with a kind of clumsy grace, if that makes any sense. And I want to take her in my arms, but I can't really do that, not under these circumstances. So I take both her hands and pull her to me, and to peck a neighborly kiss to her cheek. For a minute, neither of us says anything. Then, shading her eyes with the flat of one hand to better see the animals at play, she says, "Pretty cute, huh?" I nod. "You see how Tiger's grown?" "Yes, of course. I've been watching him all along. Is that as big as he's going to get?" The sun catches her eyes, which are a shade of plain, everyday brown. "Nobody's sure, but the vet thinks he won't get much bigger. Maybe a pound or two." "And you?" I ventured. "How are you feeling?" "Never better. You're going to be seeing more of me. Don't look scared. That's not what I mean. I'm just taking my maternity leave, though. I'm not due. Like for 6 weeks." Both her hands, pretty hands, shapely, come to rest on the bulge beneath her oversized blouse. They're really being nice about it at work. Connie's not planning to take off till the minute her water breaks, because that's the way Connie is, and I want to tell her that by way of contrast, just to say something. But I notice that she's looking over my shoulder, and I turn my head to see the tall girl coming up the walk, leash in hand. "Sorry," the girl calls out. "She got loose again. Sorry, sorry." I know what it is, but I'm feeling generous, expansive. "No problem," I call out. "She's just having a little fun." That that's when Connie's car slashes into the driveway going too fast, and all I can think is she's going to hit one of the animals. But she brakes at the last minute, and they flow like water around the tires to chase back across the lawn again. It's hard to gauge the look on my wife's face as she swings open the car door, pushes herself laboriously from behind the wheel, and sets first one foot, then the other on the pavement. I really should go help her, but it's as if I'm frozen in place. Then starts up the walk as if she hasn't seen us. Just as she reaches the front steps, Connie scribbles round. I can see she's considering whether it's worth the effort to come greet our neighbor and get a closer look at the tall girl who hovers behind us like the avatar she is. But she decides against it. She just stops a moment, staring. And though she's 30 feet away, I can see a kind of recognition settle into her features. And it has to do with the way Allison is standing there beside me as if for a portrait or an illustration in a book on family planning, male and female, the XY chromosome and the XX. It's just a moment, and I can't say for certain, but her face goes rigid, and she turns her back on us, mounts the steps, and slams the door behind her. When the CRISPR technology first came to light, governments and scientists everywhere assured the public that it would be employed only selectively to fight disease and rectify congenital deformities, editing out the mutated BRCA1 gene that predisposes women to breast cancer, for instance, or eliminating the ability of the Anopheles mosquito to carry the parasite that transmits malaria. Who could argue with that? Genome editing kits knock out any gene were sold to home hobbyists who create their own anomalous forms of yeast and bacteria in their kitchens. And it was revolutionary. And beyond that, fun. Fun to tinker, fun to create. The pet and meat industries gave us rainbow-colored aquarium fish, seahorses that incorporated gold dust in their cells, rabbits that glowed green under a black light, the beefed-up super cow, the micropig, the dog cat, and all the rest. The Chinese were the first to renounce any sort of regulatory control and upgrade the human genome, and as if they weren't brilliant enough already, they became still more brilliant as the first edited children began to appear, and, of course, we had to keep up. In a room at Gen Lab, Connie and I were presented with an exhaustive menu of just how our chromosomes could be made to match up. We chose to have a daughter. We selected emerald eyes for her. Not iridescent, not freakishly bright, but enhanced for color so that she could grow up wearing mint, olive, Kelly green, and let her eyes do the talking for her. We chose height, too, as just about everybody did. And musical ability. We both love music. Intellect, of course. And finer features, too, like a subtly cleft chin and breasts that would be optimal. Not too big, but not as small as Connie's either. It was a menu, and we placed an order. The tall girl is right beside us now, smiling like the heroine of a Norse saga, her eyes sweeping over us like searchlights. She moves to Allison, takes in her condition. Or a girl, she asks. The softest smile plays over Allison's lips. She ducks her head, shrugs. The girl, the genius, looks confused for a moment. But, how can that be? You don't mean you... But before Allison can answer, a crow parrot sweeps out of the nearest tree, winging low to screech, "Fuck you!" in our faces. And the smallest miracle occurs. Tiger, as casual in his own skin as anything there is or ever was, erupts from the ground in a rocketing whirl of fur to catch the thing in his jaws. As quick as that, it's over. And the feathers, the prettiest feathers you'll ever see, lift and dance and float away on the breeze. Thank you. It's been a long show, folks, but I hope a good one. I am willing to take your questions for 10 minutes or so before we head out to the green room where the festivities will continue. Any comments or questions from the audience today? Yes? Sure.
I came a little late to, as a reader of your fiction, when I first read Tortilla Curtain, I think it was, I found myself disturbed and in a way that I didn't like. And I later on began reading your books again, and I found that I liked being disturbed in that way, or I needed to. And this short story you just read from recently in the New Yorker, I really appreciate now the way that you won't shy away from these graphic or visceral descriptions, and yet still remain outside of being sensationalist. I appreciate the topical nature of your writing. I was prompted to look up some things about CRISPR. I knew nothing. I looked up the meaning of contretemps. I knew nothing. And so I appreciate that. But I guess my question is, do you seek to disturb us? or is that just a fringe benefit?
Yeah, that's just a fringe benefit. And thank you so much for that. My job is to be an artist and live within my mind each day and see what happens. And of course, I'm very much concerned about socio-political and environmental things, and this is the way I address them. Again, I don't know what the story will be. I just absorb some material and let the story speak for itself. Others? Yes?
So I'm intrigued because I'm a total fan and I've read so much of your. My question is, it strikes me you're in some ways like Virginia Woolf and James Joyce, in which both of those authors take either a short day, for example, and contrast it against something longer. Even like what you did, and you've done it many times in what you write. So a little bit of time and then a long bit of time. And I'm wondering where that comes from in your work and how the narration works for you there.
Well, that's a great observation. I really hadn't thought about it much, but again, each story finds its own way. So this one projects from where we are right now, 20 years in the future. Part of the beauty of the jokes here is that at the end, when he's saying how this all came about, he mentions these 6 or 8 creatures, the super cow and so on. Well, all but the dog cat and the crow parrot already exist now. So it's not that fantastic. It's happening now. To address your question specifically, though, I think sometimes I'm writing something with a historical perspective, like World's End, for instance, and sometimes I'm writing something contemporary, like A Friend of the Earth, which then projects into the future. I can't really say how that comes about. I just begin to feel something and follow it. So, do we have one more and hang it up?
As many as you can hang it.
Oh, okay,
Any more,
great.
if there are more?
Yes.
Nobody on this side wants to ask a question.
Being read too aloud was great. You did it so well. First of all, what was the title of that story?
Are We Not Men?
And are you going to be doing the audio version
Yes, I will.
of the Terranauts?
Yeah. I have, not the Terranauts, no. This is part of the new book, which will come out next year. It's called The Relive Box and Other Stories, and I will do the narration for that. I wanted to do the voice of Ramsey for this book, but they taped it in New York with 3 actors, obviously 2 females and 1 male, and I didn't want to go to New York to do it. I wanted to do it here in sound design, Don Carmendella's studio, where I do whole stories. However, the New Yorker had me recorded there for their podcast, so if you want to hear the story again, you can hear it on their podcast. But yeah, next year I'd like to do the stories in my own voice if I can, so I will do that when this book comes out. I hadn't heard the tape of the actors, and it's getting some award from Audiophile, so I just got home. So I listened to parts of it yesterday, all 3 actors, and Linda Ryu steals the show because she's the one who is bitching all the time. It's like a Iago part, and she's great. The actress is great.
I have a question.
Yes.
My daughter read your book in high school, and then I read it with her. How many high schools in California actually read your book?
I don't know, but it's not only in California, it's throughout the country and also in foreign countries too. People read the Tortilla Curtain either in high school or college in one course or another, and I'm quite honored by that. It's wonderful to be part of the canon. On the other hand, as you can see from what I'm doing today, I love to go to colleges and give them a show to remind them that literature is not just something that we're going to study in school and write the dreaded term paper on, but that it's a living art that is meant to be enjoyed and is fun. That's the bottom line of all literature. No matter who's written it or what it is, it's fun on some level. And I want to convey that to them. So that's why I love to read to audiences. Yes.
Do you have fights with editors, or are they generally willing to take whatever you send them?
Do I have fights with editors, or are they generally willing to take whatever I send them? No, I don't have fights with editors because I'm an autocrat. Pretty much everything you see in print is exactly what I turned in. I'm also a perfectionist, and I don't really listen to what other people say. Although not to say that I'm completely ignorant of what my agent and editor might say. I do take it under consideration. But basically, I never needed that. I don't show it to anybody in progress. It just happens, and when it's done, I send it. And sometimes there are comments on it, sometimes not. Mainly, I don't follow them. The New Yorker's an exception. Deborah Treisman there is the best editor I've ever worked with. And she will make small suggestions and maybe some cuts here and there to perfect the story, and I appreciate that. But basically, I'm delivering what I consider a finished product that I've worked on and made as perfect as I can make it. Yes?
If, speaking of Deborah Treisman, sometimes she has authors read sometimes Deborah Treisman of the New Yorker has authors pick an article to read from back issues of the New Yorker for a podcast. Have you done that? And if you would in the future, what would you choose?
Well, I've done it a couple of times, and you can choose anything that's been published in the New Yorker. So I think the first, I did a George Saunders story, which I love. Then I did, I've done several times. I'd like to do a Cheever story, but a lot of people have already done Cheever stories. I did 2 Bartholomew stories. So it's really fun, and I like to do it, and I expect I will do it again in the future, in addition to reading my own stories now, which I love. When you publish a story, you get to read it and or have a conversation with the author. Some don't want to read the story, but I like to read the story. Yes?
How old were you when you started writing, and what did that look like when you were a little boy? And when did you know that you were going to be a writer as a profession?
It came relatively late to me. That sounds ridiculous, but as opposed to my students, for instance, who, when they came out of the womb were already typing. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know that you could write books or that there was a profession that did that. When I came from a working class family in New York, first of our family ever to go to college, I discovered literature in college, and I became a history major, an English major, double major, and my 3rd year I wandered into a creative writing classroom and then got the idea that that was something that I could do and that I wanted to do, and it's lucky, and it's absorbed me ever since. So, by the time I went to graduate school, I was 25 when I went to Iowa writing workshop. But I had been writing some stories and published one prior to that, and that's how I got in, I think, or had at least the confidence to apply.
So I think maybe out of respect for your cold, we should stop now, and with great gratitude for an amazing... starting us off so beautifully, and with that video, which had such high impact. It's been a wonderful ride. We do have books outside, and I know that Connie will need to sign a few. So if you're interested in that, we're just outside the auditorium. But thank you all for giving up an afternoon to listen to us. I think so, Thank you.